Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Renaissance Center. My name is Tavon Myers. I am the Empowerment Mentor Specialist, and here we're having tonight the Renaissance Center chat. Tonight, I'll be joined by two special guests, Mr. Reverend Terrence Collins and Dr. Kyle Berkley will be joining us. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tonight, I'll let you guys go ahead and give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do. We'll start with Reverend Collins and then Dr. Berkley, and then we'll jump into our discussion tonight.
Yes, Terrence D. Collins. I do substance abuse mental health services here in the Baltimore area, licensed clinician in the state of Maryland, but I'm also built on creation, fall, and redemption. I'm a Christian counselor first, also pastor, um, and of course, a servant of the community.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Dr. Berkley.
My name is Dr. Kyle Berkley. You can call me Kyle. Um, I am a mental health therapist here in Baltimore City. I have worked in various fields. I've worked in with the homeless services for over 14 years at Healthcare for the Homeless and at Project Place. I've worked at Crisis Response for 9 years now. I have also worked for Roberta's House with families of homicide victims and Renaissance Center. I've been here since the year 2020.
All right.
Yeah, just to name a few. I've also worked in politics as well. Served 2 terms on a state central committee.
All right. Well, thank you both for being here tonight. And tonight we're going to be talking about men's mental health. We know that it's the month of November, and we normally say Movember, but it's a month that uh, centralized around men's mental health. And when you think about the topic of men's mental health, some questions come to mind. And I guess when you think about what makes men kind of hesitant to do therapy, what comes to mind just thinking about that question? What makes a man hesitant to come to therapy, and how do you handle that, or what's some things that we can say to them to encourage it tonight? And I'll start with Reverend Collins.
Well, it's interesting. Creation, fall, and redemption. We all know that when the word says in Genesis, they were naked and ashamed. Shame has a big impact. It makes us very delusional. We think about others' things. We think that our vulnerabilities is something that we want to hide. But for men, it's in order for us to understand the importance of our health and wellness, and our whole overall health and wellness is going to infringe on us getting the necessary treatment in all of the dimensions of our existence, mind, body, and soul. And then
Absolutely.
the fear, and then having to come to grips with the fact that, hey, I don't have it together. How's that going to emasculate me? But when we understand the importance of being able to teach and be able to lead and direct in our community, health and wellness, mind, body, and soul is a priority for us. You can't teach what you don't know.
Absolutely. Dr. Brick, you want to add to that?
Yes. First of all, I love what what Reverend Collins just stated. Uh, just to add too, there's also the stigma attached to it. There's the shame attached to it. Growing up, I remember if you fall down or get hurt, you always heard, "Oh boy, put some dirt on it," right? And that was a weird way of teaching us to get over things, like not seeking out to get help or actually acknowledging the pain. I remember playing football in 3rd grade, as early on as that, and doing the Oklahoma drill and getting hit. And there, I'm like, man, that really hurt, because I was a running back then, and that was my first time actually ever getting really hit. When you play with your friends, they're not really hitting you like that. But when you're playing and you're trying out for a spot early on, those guys are hitting you for real. And my first time really getting hit, and you're down there like, whew, and you hear that, you bet not cry, get up. So that becomes part of an inbred thing of don't cry. You can't show weakness. You can't be vulnerable. And therapy, there's a huge amount of vulnerability when you come into those offices, and it's that stigma of, oh, this person is crazy, this person has problems, or this person is vulnerable, or I'm scared to be vulnerable because it's been embedded in me since I was so young not to be vulnerable, not to be weak.
Absolutely. I think that's interesting. Both perspectives are really spot on. Because you think about it, to some degree, therapy feels like stepping into unfamiliar territory. And so it's something new. And we're taught to fix things on our own, right? To be strong, to your point, and to be that provider, to be that protector. So oftentimes when life does get heavy, the idea of sitting down and talking about it can make one feel weak. uh, that vulnerable space. It's very sensitive, and also that fear, the fear of being judged or the fear of not knowing what to say. All of that comes up as well. So when you think about that, how does the societal expectations of masculinity affects men's ability to express emotions? And I'll defer to you on that one, Dr. Berkeley.
I'm gonna speak from the black man's plight and perspective, not from the general everybody's perspective. I'm going to say something I said before in another training I did here at Renaissance Center, and that is we come from a generation that was raised by generation that was raised by generation that was raised by generation that just came out of slavery, and by that learning from those generations, each one of those generations taught the next generation to do better than what we did, and from that we were trying to figure out, and each one of those generations trying to figure out and develop what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be a married couple that were not what the slave masters were, but to be our own selves. And when those things were passed down from generation to generation, and that identity was being developed and cultivated from generation to generation, that sense of masculinity took on many different forms. The real strong father figure that we saw in Good Times, the educated figure that we saw on The Cosby Show, the funny figure that we saw on Martin, the stern figure that was successful, but somewhat, but also kicked back and was able to do his own thing in the Bernie Mac show. Like those were different representations that I could just throw out of what we saw of black masculinity, not any of them actually being a direct definition of black masculinity, but just different forms of it. Even growing up for myself, I grew up in West Baltimore, also grew up in the church. For me, the deacon board was always like the uncles that you wish you had, and a lot of them, they worked at Bethlehem Steel, or they worked in the hospital, or they were post office workers, and you saw them as successful. So you emulated that because that was masculinity. You saw them come to church, they had their wives, they had their kids, and you go, oh, I want to be like this guy right here, I want to be like Deacon so and so. Or you would see the person around the neighborhood that would have the fancy car, and you'd be like, oh, what do you do? And you find out this person works in the meat department at the supermarket, and you'd be like, oh, well, I could do this. So it's figuring, like I said, we're figuring out piece by piece because we're raised by a generation that was taught to do better than the last generation. But we were given, I'm gonna use the term, we were given scraps, right? And we had to make the best out of it. Each time we built on those blocks, and that's how we created who we were as black men.
I find it very interesting. That was so wonderful. But what I'm finding also with black men is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
There's a disassociation almost 100% in the population. And from that moment of being separated, and of course, the systematic trauma that we faced for over 400 years, it makes us to not really want to deal with our health. We have to see that the health of an African American male is going to play a very important role in the whole success of the community. Because then the men are going to maturate, they're going to get older, and they can pour into the lives of the younger children and continue to build the community. But just knowing that there's something that may be deficient in my health can paralyze me because of the trauma and all of the disconnect from really wanting to be in contact with myself. Trauma itself actually impacts the DNA. That 400 years of slavery makes us begin to believe that we're not as human as we should be. And we take on these images of being more than human. And we have to realize that our health and wellness is going to tie not just into our own success, but the success of the greater community. And I think when we begin to see it that way, then we see that whether we're in a peak performance of health, but we do understand that it's important to be healthy, mind, body, and soul. And then we have the balance in being able to build in the competencies and the skills to deal with whatever knowledge comes from the doctor's visits and having annual and semi-annual physicals, being connected, being aware of one's blood pressure, our weight, what we put into our bodies, what image we're reflecting in the community in which we live. The total man, mind, body, and soul all fits into the healthy process integrated into a sick community. So it's not just, the trauma itself, but it's just understanding what role you play in being healthy and having an active part in the life and having an impactful life with those you care about the most.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that. I think it's interesting because when you think about that traditional masculinity, it's often it discourages us from showing as men emotional openness for the fear of, rejection or the fear of being demasculated and so forth. And that causes emotional suppression to take place. And when you have that emotional suppression, that's what links to the rates of depression and substance misuse and suicide, and so on. So, from a young age, boys are told to, as Dr. Berkley said earlier, man up, which often means to also shut down. And you're not able to express, what you're feeling in those moments. So when men suppress emotions, they lose access to connection. They lose access to that clarity and that healing aspect that could take place. But that psychological safe space has now been ruined and not not available to them, so they don't know what to do with those emotions. So it leads to all of those other issues coming to light. So when thinking of that, what comes to mind is what are some signs of emotional burnout that men often ignore or downplay because of some of the impact that they've experienced? And I'll go to you, Reverend Collins.
When you say the emotional burnout, you mean living life on life's terms?
Living life on life terms.
Okay. Well, if you're going to do that, you definitely have to have an understanding of the 8 dimensions of wellness, and the strongest of those 8 dimensions is your spirituality, mind, body, and soul. And so burnout doesn't occur when you're mind, body, and soul, and you're working on balance in all those areas for your life. You may get a little tired, but you have a process in which to be regenerated because your spirituality is so important. And so now when you begin to have emotional issues, make sure that you can identify what's really causing the emotion. You may identify it as anger, but there's something else that either occurred in your upbringing or the things that you begin to believe to be true, makes you even more delusional about really what is happening. And you have all these emotions that come out, and individuals think it's one thing, they're angry or they're not respected or resented or something of that nature, not being heard. But there's something else that really is causing this emotion, something that you've absorbed either as a child and you didn't have an understanding of what was going on at the time. You had to make this adult decisions, because I know in my community, when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, I was required to put diapers and raise my sisters and my brothers. So I automatically knew at 12 years old, I had to man up or do whatever I had to do because I wasn't living for myself. I had to go and take the responsibility of the community because there wasn't a father in the community. And, I had to support and be older at the time, but making adult decisions. And so the emotions really wasn't anchored. When I have an emotional burnout, it's the emotion have not really been identified really what's going on with the burnout or what's causing that. I can be emotional, but I have to understand what emotion am I really anchoring this the burnout on or the exhaustion on. It could be anger, it could be resentment, it could be unforgiveness, it could be I run across a lot of African American men that don't even want to accept that there's a diagnosis there. We all have a diagnosis of mental health. We need to be able to identify that. And then once we identify that, be able to do the necessary means to treat it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Reverend Collins hit the nail right on the head. If I could add on anything, it would be industry versus inferiority. A lot of us, and I'm gonna speak for myself. I'm not gonna speak for everybody else in the group. If you agree with me, thank you, hallelujah. Right, but during that age range, what's that, 7 to 13, or 8 to 13, when you're hitting industry versus inferiority, where for those that don't know what I'm talking about, industry is when you're fitting in and you have that sense of independence and you're doing well and you're developing the skills that you're independent and you could do well. And inferiority is if you don't have the skills or you're not fitting in with those social groups. And I could say that middle school age, when you hit 7th grade and 8th grade, that's when it really starts to hit home the most. That inferiority complex kicks in, and you see that carry over later on in life, where people may joke on you. So I'll be the first to tell anybody, growing up, we didn't have everything. I grew up in Westport. So we didn't have all of the finer things. So I didn't have a pair of Jordans. I got a pair of Fila's from the Value City right there on Route 40. It's not there anymore. But for those that know and have been initiated, you know what I'm talking about. And my clothes were hand me down. I had Bugle Boy jeans that were hand me downs from either my cousin John or my cousin Ronnie. I didn't get the new pair of whatever Levi's, or I didn't get the fresh polo. I had what was available, and that was fine. And it was to the point where I didn't even realize I was poor until I went to a private school in 7th grade, and I'm at this private school, and there's kids there with laptops, and they have actual backyards, because my backyard was an alley, and there's kids, there's people riding around on riding lawnmowers, and my classmate had a swimming pool in his backyard. I had a gate in my across the alley in my backyard with a bulldog behind it. So forget a swimming pool. I didn't even have that much space for it. And it hit me going to that birthday party. Oh wow, I don't have what they have. And to circle that right around to what Reverend Collins was saying, and that chasing aspect is, from that point on, it seems like you're chasing the Joneses. My first thing I did when I wanted to do was make my own money. I didn't want to do what a lot of people around my way was doing, which was selling drugs. So I went out and I got a job. My first job was Giant Food. I pushed carts. I worked the salad bar. I saved my money. I purchased a car, and I kept going from there. And I hit burnout at a certain point when I was 22. I'm working for the state, and I'm working a lot of overtime to buy all these nice things. And I had my little girlfriend. I wanted to take her to all the nice places out in the county. I didn't want to go in the city at all. Like I wanted to just see different parts of the world. Like, it was one point in time I was like, even when I was younger and doing the quote unquote club life, I would not party in the city. I wanted to see other parts of the world, because still thinking back to that inferiority stage, I looked at where I was at as a state of inferiority. I needed to do better. I needed to be better. And I was trying to become more, and it was burning me out because I'm working so hard to get to this image that I felt like I deserved to have, or I felt like I didn't have and I didn't see. And it impacts you.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting hearing both perspectives, because it makes me thinking about the fatigue and the detachment at the same time. And that loss of interest that occurs because it's often masked by being overworked. Is often masked by substance use and emotional numbness. So when you think of burnout to some degree, it doesn't always look like a collapse, right? It can look like going through motions, or snapping at loved ones, or feeling nothing at all. And so when you think about the conversation around men's mental health, men often push through, to our point, until their bodies force a breakdown. Um, And that's some of the challenges that, we go through as well, because emotional burnout, it's real, but it builds slowly. And sometimes you don't recognize that burnout is occurring until it's too late. And so, the body always keeps the score, as they say, right? And if we don't listen, it will eventually force us to stop, whether we're ready to stop or not. And I want to encourage our listeners also to feel free to put some questions or comments in the chat. If you have any questions, we'll definitely answer them. You'll see at the bottom of the screen the phone number where you can reach out if you need some support, want to have a deeper conversation with a clinician. You can call us at the Renaissance Center at 410-409-0025. And someone will be there waiting to receive your call and provide you any clinical support necessary. All right. So, gentlemen, just thinking about the conversation so far, um, and what comes to mind is, why do you men sometimes feel pressure to tough it out instead of seeking help? What does that come from? What do you think regarding that, Reverend Collins?
Well, I always, for men, what I find is men can be very, and very centered on themselves. And when you understand that your role is to serve, when I say that, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me. I'm Christian based from faith. And so now what you're able to do in your life is not based upon what I do, but it's based on the relationships that I have. Everything is relationships. So those men you mentioned that are having very difficult, I would ask them, what relationships are they most involved with? Because if you're focusing on yourself and your health, because even when I go to the doctor, I'm not focusing on me. I'm thinking about the fact that I want to be healthy, to be able to contribute and be part of my grandchildren's life, to be in my community, working in my civic association, praying and working with my church brothers, building, doing God's will. So my whole perspective about life is not centered on me. And when you find yourself centered on you, you get in a very survival mode. And that means you fire in every direction. In the Marine Corps, they said when you get into survival mode, you just start yelling and screaming and firing in every direction. But when you understand your purpose in life and you allow your spirituality to lead and direct you, a lot of the ailments, because life is so built on relationships, a lot of the autoimmune diseases, the high blood pressure, the other health issues that causes us great stress, they begin to be removed. I had a dear friend of mine, Dr. Shell, who works for NIH. He told me, say, TC, if you get back to the health you were at 17 years old, your body will reset itself. And so that meant that I had to get rid of the alcohol. I had to get rid of the negative thoughts. I had to get rid of not being committed to my family. I had to get rid of all the stuff that toxified my life. And when I began to do that, then I found that stability was possible, but I had to achieve it in a daily way I lived. That's why I talk about one day at a time. So my question becomes, are those who are looking to learn about their mental health, because the mental health is going to be predicated on how you live each day. Every day, every moment of your life, when you wake up in the morning, how you start your day, whether it's not as devotion, reading your word, staying focused, because the word of God, Jesus, is life and life in abundantly. And that's health, mind, body, and soul. And so now you see that you have to develop your spirituality in order to be healthy in all of those 8 dimensions of your existence. So spirituality is the strength that gives us the ability to deal with all of the obstacles of life on life's terms every day. I think that's the key to life, is your spirituality.
I agree. Tavon, can you do me a favor? Ask the question one more time.
Why do men sometimes feel pressure to tough it out instead of seeking help?
Yeah. So, like Reverend Collins said, it's the spirituality piece. Another part would be who we've had as models or as role model. Like, who have we modeled after? That tough it out piece has come from. Some of our models have been, men are supposed to be givers, not takers, right? We're supposed to give, like Reverend Collins said, working. Like, I'm supposed to work. I'm supposed to provide. I'm supposed to provide a roof overhead. I know early on in my marriage, there was a hard time situation, and my wife was saying, why do I want to take on an extra job? And I was saying, hey, look, it's easier, and this may sound funny to some people, but it's easier for a woman to fail and move back home, you know, and nobody bats an eye. But if a man who's married fails and he moves that family into that house, that man is a failure, and nobody wants to put up with that situation. And that's the idea of, that's the model. The man is supposed to be the provider. If everything goes wrong, that falls on the man. That's not the woman's fault. And that is part of how we are brought up, how things have been instilled from generation to generation. Going back to what I said earlier, we were raised by people who were raised by people who were raised by people who were just free from slavery. And this idea was passed down to do better per each generation. Then you have this concept of an alpha man, right? What is an alpha man? Well, we can't really give actual definitions of what that is, but we can give ideas and hints of what that is. And sometimes we pick up on, I have to be an alpha man, or I have to be this alpha, I have this macho bravado. And this is what I have to show. This is what I have to give. And this is me being a giver, not a taker, and I can't show weakness.
You bring something to mind as you guys were talking, because there's this unspoken rule that men should always be able to handle anything, and that asking for help is weakness, and so we quote unquote tough it out, right? Even when we're drowning, we wear this mask, we keep the pain private, and we hope that it just passes and the next day just comes. But that type of pressure is what's really killing us, literally. Um, and the truth is that strength isn't about silence; it's about knowing when to reach out. So when we can shift the narrative from "I have to do this alone" and switch that narrative to saying "I deserve support," I believe everything changes. Because toughing it out might look like, being strong, may look strong, but healing takes real courage. And one cannot possess the healing and really focus on the spirituality that you guys are talking about because they're still dealing with that I have to fix it. And if I can't fix something, at least I can try to fix myself. And some of that comes to, that cultural conditioning that talks about, from generations of how one was raised and so forth. So that cultural conditioning equates strength with stoicism, and it's the fear of also being judged and emasculated. So when you think of those concepts and this that truth that strength, I have to tough it out, and then I got to keep the pain private and hope that it passes. Talk to me about what comes to mind when we're thinking of that, and how could we encourage those listeners right now to see it as changing the narrative from "I have to do this alone" to "I deserve support." Reverend Collins.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I see a spin on what you just said. I interpreted what you said very differently because when you're talking about what a real man is, now I can know those who understand not to be saved, but we're all spiritual, mind, body, and soul. And the spirituality is going to give us the foundation, and it's going to make us humble ourselves in humility, which is saying I'm human, I'm ill, and I'm almost dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to put my power, whatever I think I have, under a higher power. And that's the obedience that comes in understanding living an obedient lifestyle. Now, when you have those who don't understand the spirituality, then you're always going to have the flesh, the selfishness, always driving how they experience life. But when you begin to understand what life is and is predicated on mind, body, and soul, but that spirituality gives you a new outlook on how to live life. You see, so when you talk about what you're saying, is you're saying that some of these men don't understand their spirituality, so they're living in their flesh, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they're in that particular place, the only thing they're going to focus on is what they think they can do, because pride is never going to get you where you want to be as a man. Man's success is predicated on his relationship to the Creator. And no matter what we do, you see in the story of Moses, he kept saying, I can't speak. But when you talk about being able to get the most out of life, it comes from your foundation of your spirituality. And if you don't have that, once you get that transformation and the renewing of the mind and be able to understand that you're connected to the universe through Jesus Christ, salvation, it changes how you live your life. It changes how you make decisions, and it changes how you're going to feel. It changes what you will do. It's changing how you see what life is. And that's the transformation. You say, but as long as you're in that sense of not understanding one of the basic components of our existence is that connection with the Creator. Now, and I can understand the humanality of how man exists, but I see men every day because I do substance use, I do PHP, I work in all of those areas where you see those who don't embrace and understand their spirituality. They're just going into an addiction loop. They go around in the same circles, the same misery. All they do is stick to the negativity. There's no joy, there's no peace, there's no understanding that there's a way in order to have life and have it abundantly.
Absolutely. I appreciate that perspective. Kyle, you want to add to that?
Yeah. First of all, I completely agree with Reverend Collins. Secondly, I want to just add for the people that have pain in silence, it's very easy because there's multiple different ways that we do suffer in silence and pain. And sometimes it's grief, right? Like I remember I'll use my father for an example. I use this example a lot. There's some other examples that attach to this that I'm going to go with that's going to be slightly different than I've talked about in the past. But my father was an ordained deacon for over 40 years. I looked up to my dad like nobody's business. Like I love my dad more than anything in the world. And I remember when he died, there was this amount of hurt that I can't even explain. Now, I grew up raised in the church, nothing but pastors, preachers, elders, deacons, everything else in my family. I know the word inside and out better than most. And sadly, that was one of the hardest blows because there was a lot of complications around that. There was complications around where I was doing ministry at the time. There was complications around my job at the time. There was just complications just even around marriage. My wife and I, we had experienced a miscarriage at that time. So there was like a lot of different factors that was going on, right? And that hit me. So there was some suffering and silence going on there. On top of the suffering and silence going on there, I could go all the way back to my best friend Chris, him being killed, and finding out that your best friend was killed 2 weeks after, like 2 weeks after the funeral's over. Not 2 weeks after the murder, 2 weeks after the funeral's over. So there's that grieving part right there, and at that point in time, it wasn't like Facebook and Instagram and everything like that. Like, so I lost his number. I had a friend of mine who lived right on this bus, like where he lived at, and they both caught the bus together. And for whatever reason, they kept missing each other. They get me the phone number, and there was like grief around that, and there was some resentment around there, and then there was like the suffering and silence. Meanwhile, I'm going to work every day at a job I hated, and it was just rough, and that was the state job. It was just compound, just trauma and just grief around that, and there was suffering and silence going on. In addition to that, I wanted to move up. I wanted to do more in life. I wanted to go back to college, and then I remember while I was in college, I had a cousin of mine who I was taking care of. She was terminally ill with cancer. And I remember at this point in time, I'm doing family fast, like I'm calling the family together. We're fasting from this time to this time. We're doing this kind of a fast. We're doing prayer from this time to this time. And my cousin was still called home. And I'm like, dude, God, I put all my faith in you. Right. And I really need it. I really need you to come through. Not from me, but she has 3 small children that really need you, and I have so many questions, and I'm suffering in silence, right? Because I've lost a best friend, I lost a cousin, both murdered. I'm trying to do a lot of different things differently in my life, and I'm suffering in silence. And then this death hits me. And then it was just like one death after another, and I'm suffering in silence. And then sadly, what wound up happening to my dad happened, right? Where he passed away, and I'm suffering in silence. Meanwhile, I'm doing all my ministry assignments at the ministry I was a part of, and things started happening over there that really was hurtful. Um, I'll just put it that way. And I'm suffering in silence, and I'm not speaking out. Meanwhile, it's impacting my work. It's impacting my home life. It's impacting my sleep. It's impacting my eating. It's impacting almost every facet of my life, even my parenting. And that's that pain and silence, that how the question was brought up. So yes, I still have my relationship with Christ. I'm not out drinking. I'm not out smoking. I'm not on the corner. I'm not cursing any. I'm not doing anything to turn my back towards God at this point in time. But I'm suffering in silence because there needed to be some sort of help and aid. Yes, I have a wife. Yes, that's my helpmate. Yes, that's my help aid. But there needed to be some other. That's a support system in that setting, though. So in that suffering and silence, that's when it turned into I need to talk to somebody. So I went to counseling, and that was one of the best things that could have ever happened to me, because it put things into perspective, and it helped build me back to a good baseline.
Absolutely. Understanding that real strength is knowing when to ask for support, and real strength is also choosing healing over hiding. And sometimes we mask that pain. And so, it's interesting because toughing it out is often praised, right? Oh, you're strong, you're this, you're enduring. But that also can lead one to have isolation and dealing with that untreated pain over time. And that's when, you have those what I call cave experiences, when you run and hide in a cave emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And you're just living, you're just existing in the moment. You're physically present, but mentally, emotionally, you're absent. So when you think about that, how can we create, I would say, safer spaces for men to talk about mental health without judgment? Um, and I'll start with Kyle and then go to Reverend Collins on that one. How can we create a safer space for men to talk about mental health without judgment?
I would say we normalize it. I'm starting to see, especially working in crisis, at crisis response, I'm starting to see it more and more with this younger generation, where they are open to talk about what's going on. Contrary to that, I'm seeing the older generation being the ones that push back with the younger generation, getting the mental health treatment, for various reasons. But it's sad. But at the same time, I'm glad that these resources are there, where you're seeing school counselors, and you're seeing our people now really engaging with these counselors and developing relationship with a school counselor, social worker, school psychiatrist. Or we're seeing younger people being uh, going the route of getting medication for treatment, and that is a plus. There are some kickbacks, because I'm going to give both sides to that. Reverend Collins could probably attest to this as well, where in the state of Maryland, the age of consent is 12 years old. So there is a kickback to that, right? Where, okay, I have my child who's having something going on in their life, and I should be a part of this, but I'm not aware, because my child is able to give consent. So there's like this closed door, or this closed file, that I don't have any knowledge of. So I think that's part of why there's some pushback around some of the parents around that. And then you have the anti-vaxxers and a lot of parents that don't want their kids on medication for various reasons, which that's a whole nother rhyme for another time. But I am starting to notice a lot of younger people gravitating towards mental health and getting treatment to do better. And in this day and time, you're starting to see a rise in suicide amongst our people, African American boys and African American girls. You see a rise in self harm around African American boys, African American girls. You're seeing a rise in anorexia, binge eating, and purge eating amongst African American females, youth females at that. And it's it's and let's not forget, we're 5 years removed from a pandemic. Well, from the start of a pandemic. So a lot of things that we've just crawled out of, or we're starting to crawl out of, are having its major effects now. So the isolation that happened from like how we're doing right now, talking on the screen. Well, remember, we have youth that this is how some of them were introduced to school. Some of them didn't graduate. When I graduated with my PhD, my graduation was online. Like there's a YouTube video of me walking through my living room doing my graduation walk for my PhD, because I didn't actually walk across the stage because of the pandemic. Well, just think about how many kids didn't go to their prom because of the pandemic. How many kids didn't graduate college? The whole social development, when we start, how we talked about the stage of development before, and how things have now changed to a research study that just came out where they talk about intimacy and how that has now changed, where they talk about, what was it, 1 in 3 couples or 1 in 5 couples now have intimacy. I'll use that terminology, well, at least once a month now, like how it's declined because people are finding more gratitude in just being to themselves. I'm sure Reverend Collins will talk about how in end times men, people become lovers of themselves, and that isn't a word, but we're actually seeing that now in research because of what we're coming out of in this pandemic, and it's having effects. We saw a rise in divorce at one point in time from 2020 to 2023 because people were stuck home and they realized the partner that they were with, they couldn't stand. Why? Because you had 8 hours a day where this partner went to work, you went to work, you guys came home, you may have had a meal together, you talked, no, you spoke, sorry, I'm speaking the King's language. You spoke and you went to sleep and you start the hamster wheel all over again. Well, then people were stuck home. Now, from the pandemic, you have all these other issues that have arose, such as raising kids. And then people realize, I don't like the way how you raise your kids, or substance abuse, where maybe somebody was able to use, I'm gonna just say marijuana. I'm not going to go into any other narcotics, but it may not have been as big of a issue, but it got magnified during the pandemic and coming out, and now it's become a major issue, and it's led to separation, or even belief systems. It's become a bigger issue in the divide, or politics. So it's weird how this has really impacted us, this pandemic, and it's impacted us as men, and it impacted us as a family coming out of that pandemic into what we're seeing today. However, I am glad that we're seeing younger people who have endured that seeking treatment.
Collins.
Well, I think that one thing is, I always talk about autoimmune and disconnection. I think that the spiritual component, there's such a disconnect in understanding a mutual understanding of the need for each other. You know, when you're focusing on yourself, you can't really look at other people suffering. I like the Beatitude where Jesus had them set there to didactum there at the Beatitude, and he has them look at all the people suffering. One of the things I found is the most rewarding thing in my life is the fellowship that I have with men who can be honest, you know, in all professions, all educational levels, but they can get genuinely appreciate being connected. I think that's something that's happened even from the slave ship coming over here. All they wanted to do in the industrialized culture is keep us separated to where we can't see the importance of having each other. You see, even in our faith communities, you got more disgruntledness even in our faith community. But the whole key is that when we have each other, our lives are complete. It's not about my fortune. It's not about whether I'm suffering, when I can share with you whether you can do anything about it. But to know that we're in it together, it makes me feel more understanding, more compassionate, more human, more caring. It brings out the best in me, you know. And so I think that's one of the things that is causing a big illness in our community. When I work with families and I ask them, I said, how often do the week do you have dinner together? So as you said, brother, any place that creates a venue to where brothers can come together, whether some going to share the truth and some not going to be honest, some going to be afraid. But when they get there and they get in the aura of men coming together because they care about each other, because they understand the power of love and kindness and gentleness and the relationship that they have with the Creator, that's when the healing process is going to occur. You're not going to have two people that are not in that mindset and that understanding themselves cause any healing with each other. Healing comes one to another, but the people who are healing each other know what their foundation and how to build healthy relationships. You see, that's why you see a lot of time in trauma bonding. People are trauma and all over the place, and they bond together, and they got this relationship that they believe is so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But so when you come together and you have healthy relationships in the foundations of our community, men in our men community, and you offer an opportunity for men to come and get together with other men and care about each other and fellowship, that's where the healing is going to occur. That's where the power of the togetherness has to occur. Because in this industrialized society, they have sent men in massive incarceration, HIV, you know, men that walked away from their children and now they're grandfathers, and they have depression because a girlfriend had an abortion. All of these things, depression, anxiety, is so riddled in the psyche of men and humans to where just the place to be able to heal one another, not sitting around, excuse the expression, yelling and screaming for the ravens. I'm talking about praying for one another. No alcohol, no substance, no cigarettes, no cursing. You see, men just being real and being able to connect and see the power of having each other. I think that's where the healing is going to occur. And so
Absolutely.
venues that facilitate that, because then men have to take time. They have to get time out their jobs. They have to put all those other priorities to make it a priority for the brothers. You know, and when you do that, you see the power of the Creator in the midst of the movement.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Great stuff. It's interesting because, you know, you think about men opening up more like in peer-led, non-clinical environments, right? And when you were talking, Reverend Collins, I thought about all the different male podcasts that's happening now, having these conversations about different things that men go through, and it's like a skyrocketing. And it makes me realize that, you know, safety does come from consistency, and when you have confidentiality, but also when you have shared vulnerability, you know. And so if I can be vulnerable and I have this psychological safe space provided, it definitely will allow me the opportunity to express myself and definitely build on those relationships and to add to my healing, right? Because that environment has to be there. So what role do you all think friendship and community plays in supporting men's mental well-being? And I'll go back to you, right, Reverend Collins.
It is pinnacle. With disassociation is 80%, 90, DSM-5 say 80, 90%. And if they're doing that in DSM-5, it's 100%. But they don't want to give you the absolute of it, the connection. And so anytime we facilitate, I work in substance abuse and in mental health on both sides, and I work with youth and in church ministries and also in counseling and therapy and community development and nonprofits. But when you can get people to begin to see the importance of their connection it changes the whole dynamics of their understanding about life. You see, what he does, he wants to isolate us. Always use the herd mentality. You know, the zebra that steps out the herd, the lion can get a bead on him. You know, stripes allows us to be able to what? Blend in together. By his stripes, we're healed. The stripes allow the herd to be the protective zone. And that's what is happening in our community. There's no protective zones in the African American community. You know, everything has been burned down. You know, and so now you find that people are looking for the protection and the honesty and getting connected through organized sports. And so now you see huge numbers of black men that spending a lot of money on gambling. You see, even the fellowship of organized sports doesn't give you the fellowship that you desperately need within your soul. You see, and that's what one man has to do to another, is provide that safe place for fellowship. Absolutely. And then people will open up and they'll talk about the real issues, and then they'll also listen to the discussion on how they can make some changes in their life. I always say recovery is in Luke 4, where Jesus says, I come to bring recovery to the blind. Mm-hmm. And that's leveling the playing field. The crooked place is straight, the low place is high. The spirit of Jubilee, you're going to be set free. And that's why recovery is very important, and we all need it. And that's what that process would look like, is when we begin to embrace each other in genuine truth and understanding how much we need each other.
Absolutely. Kyle, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, with friendship and community, support systems are extremely important. It's important in recovery. It's important in mental health. It's important in our day-to-day lives. One of the things I definitely want to say is, in your support system, you have to understand who is what in your support system. When you sent me this email a couple of days ago, I looked directly at this question, and it made me think of my friend Lamont, who was my best man at my wedding. And when I say who is what, Lamont and I's relationship dates all the way back to the year 2000, 2001, where Lamont got his job coming home from prison, and he was working at Giant. He needed a ride home, and he didn't have a vehicle. He was engaged, about to be married. His fiance was pregnant with their first child, and every day I would give him a ride home, and I would never ask him for gas money. And it came out one day, somebody asked, why are you doing this? Why you give him a ride? Maybe he even asked me that. And I was like, do you need a ride? You know, and I didn't realize at that point in time, we would wind up having one of the closest relationships in the world, but not for that. When I got married, well, actually, no, before I got married, I went through a real bad breakup with somebody. And with that bad breakup, he was the person who picked me up with his vehicle. And of course, this is where things get weird, because his first thing when he got in the car was, you better not cry. Just get over it. Right. And we talk about support systems and we rub dirt on it. Right. So I was like, oh, well, I can't go to him when I'm grieving with this whole situation. Right. He's dependable with picking me up, but I can't go to him while I'm hurting. Right. And then, you know, we get married. Well, he was already married for a good while. My wife and I, we get married, and you know, I could go to him for support in my marriage in certain situations, but in the back of my mind I go, all right, I know I can't talk about certain things because it's gonna go rub that dirt on it. Don't cry. You're gonna have to get over it. So it's knowing in that support system, who can I go to and what, because the things I could go to Lamont about also has another friend named Anthony. Anthony is very rooted, and he's a minister. And with Anthony, I could go to on the spiritual side of things, and I could get fed from a very from a spiritual lens, and it'd be different from Lamont. Lamont means well, and I understand his role in my support system, just like I understand Anthony can't handle certain weight in where I might need, so I can't go to him. So also understanding what weight people can carry and what weight people can handle. Kind of like lifting weights, which is one of my favorite hobbies, right? So some people are real good at bench pressing. Some people are good squatters. Some people are fantastic deadlifters. Some people can just do pull-ups from here to kingdom come. But different people have different strengths, and for whatever reason, they just are just maxed out in certain areas. So you have to know who in your support system you can go to. So if you're dealing with something with depression and you have Sister Maggie Sue that you could go to that could pray, can pray and help you with feeding you, because you have an issue with finances. Let's say the government shut down. Sister Maggie Sue can help hook you up with a couple dollars so where you can keep food on the table. But you can't go to Sister Maggie Sue about an issue going on in the family because Sister Maggie Sue might gossip a little bit. So a certain weight you might not can go and put on. So understanding who in your support system can handle what. But it's still important to have that support system, but also being aware of that community and what support each person can offer, and what also even you're somebody's support in their support system, right? So understanding what's your role in that support system. When somebody comes to you and talk, understand sometimes when something's out of your depth, and just being able to provide a listening ear and refer somebody to the right kind of resource, or just like, hey, look, I'm here with you, but I really don't know what you're going through, or I understand what you're going through, even though I've never walked in your shoes.
For me, it's interesting. If I'm just making a comment, it's interesting. But what I find is, anytime that you get the men together, that individual. That's why I talked about the spirituality. The individual is always going to be reasoning whether or not this person does or can do so and so, right? So what I tell the men is that you're going to have to trust. You're going to have to pray and allow the leadership from the Creator, because you're always going to have that apprehension and that reasoning and rationality in whether or not you should open up and tell. I laugh all the time because I was preaching, and I usually tell the truth when I'm about things in our lives, and my wife would get very upset about it. She'd say, "Why are you telling all our business?" And I tell her, I say, telling all our business, I said, this is everybody's business, because they're going through the same thing as you're going through. You see, you're concerned because shame makes you want to hide and not be honest. And so when your spirituality, you're led to places to where, and that's one of the things, men, if they're going to build a real authentic fellowship, they gotta trust. You see, and when they trust, I'm not saying that you were saying you're not trusting, but men have to really, really trust that they're going to receive what they need. Because I hear a lot of disappointment. I hear people, they'll go, I talked with a professional the other day, multimillionaire, and he was talking about, he was sitting in a counseling session, and then he said, well, this individual can't really tap on what I'm talking about because the person is not spiritual. I said, well, not that this is the thing is important, but you have to understand the importance of the spirituality when you're in your network or wherever those men are, and when we're working with men. And a lot of time, men who don't have that spirituality, they're going to stay in that box. And I think that's the hardest thing to get them to break out of, because if they can go and talk in mental health, because women go to behavioral health clinics more than men do. But Black men, they'll come in there entrenched in their mind, and they won't want to open up because the spirit is just dead, you see. And that's what happens a lot of times, is because we have an expectation to really connect with somebody, and it doesn't happen because they don't think it's supposed to happen physically or common out where you work at, what you do for a living. But we're talking about your spirituality, which has nothing to do with those man or those human things that men have the priorities on. So they have to really learn to really understand themselves and what their needs are.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for that rich insight. It's so important understanding that men need space where they're seen and where they're supported on both ends. So this is our last comment for the night. We have to wrap up real quick, but
Yes, sir.
just as we're leaving, what is something you want to leave with the listeners and the viewers that will support men's mental health right now? What was the last thing? And I'll
If
start with Reverend Collins, then Kyle.
if you can get my information in, if any support you need, just reach out, email or whatever. You don't have to have insurance, just whatever it is. If you want to just fellowship, whatever it is, to talk about mental health, anything issues like that, fatherhood issues, whatever it is, I'm available for that. When you go through the stages of change, the resource for the community, that's what a man is. I'm not saying women don't, but we stand. And I'm here for the brothers, those who may be listening in and that may want to have someone to talk to.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
One, I could leave this. I'm a counselor here at the Renaissance Center. You could reach out to the Renaissance Center anytime to get counseling from me. And if I could leave one thing, also just a tidbit, just to think about, as we are figuring out who we are constantly and daily. I like to give the idea of this ship. It was called the Ship of Theseus. So the Ship of Theseus was an old Greek ship, and it was in a museum, and a piece of wood fell off. They replaced the people at the museum replaced it. Then another piece of wood fell off. The people at the museum replaced it. Constantly, pieces of that ship fell off, and then it kept being replaced with wood. Well, the old pieces of wood wound up building a new ship, and then the ship that was there, the original ship, was replaced by wood. As we grow, there are parts of us that's going to fall off and be rebuilt into something new. As we get rebuilt in something new, it's what hands do we have to rebuild it also, and what do we identify? Do we want to be continued to be identified as the old ship that had the pieces of wood being fallen off, or do we want to be identified as the new ship that had the pieces that had been put together by the old pieces falling off and the new pieces being put on? And that's also who we are as identity, because we're not the same people that came over on the slave ship hundreds of years ago that endured slave ship. But that history is there, just like the history of the ship is there. That is a part of us. But who we are, what we do with our lives, and who we impact going forward, such as our children, our children's children, and the people around us, that has to tell a story. So I just wanted to leave with that thought as well.
All right. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight with your rich insight. And thank you for those who are viewing with us on all the platforms. We appreciate your participation, your attendance. Please, if you need any assistance and resources, please reach out to us at the Renaissance Center. The number's at the bottom of the screen, and it's been showing throughout our presentation. And remember this, coping isn't about fixing everything at once. It's about finding one small way to remind yourself, I'm still here, I'm still worthy, and I'm still healing. Until next time, we'll see you on the next broadcast. Thanks for joining in tonight. Have a good
Love
evening.
you, brothers. Y'all be blessed. Thank you so much. I love you.
Right.
Take care.